Welcome to the Catholic Man's Journey. Today we're going to be discussing Christians and civil authority, or as the Bible puts it, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's. And to begin with, I'm going to ask Jason de Ocampo to read a scripture passage which is relevant to our discussions.
Okay, our chosen reading for today is taken from St. Paul's letter to the Romans, chapter 13, verses 1 to 7. Let every person be subordinate to the higher authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been established by God. Therefore, whoever resists authority opposes what God has appointed, and those who oppose it will bring judgment upon themselves. For rulers are not a cause of fear to good conduct, but to evil. Do you wish to have no fear of authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive approval from it. For it is a servant of God for your good. But if you do evil, be afraid, for it does not bear the sword without purpose. It is the servant of God to inflict wrath on the evildoer. Therefore, it is necessary to be subject not only because of the wrath, but also because of conscience. This is why you also pay taxes, for the authorities are ministers of God, devoting themselves to this very thing. Pay to all their dues, taxes to whom taxes are due, toll to whom toll is due, respect to whom respect is due, honor to whom honor is due. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Thank you, Jason. And now I'm going to ask Paul to read the little story.
Will left the office early with a touch of the winter flu. A fever and occasional chills made him feel terrible. All he could think about was getting home and going to bed. Little else caught his attention, including the fact that he was driving 45 miles per hour in a 30-mile-per-hour zone until he heard the siren. He looked into his rear view mirror, saw the flashing blue lights on the motorcycle, and realized he had been caught in a speed trap. Will felt a mixture of emotions: embarrassment, anger, resentment. Responding to these emotions without thinking, Will decided, when the cop comes up to my window to write a speeding ticket, I'll just breathe on him really hard and give him the flu. That'll serve him right. End of story.
Remember the last time you got a traffic ticket? How did you feel about the police officer who stopped you? What was wrong with Will's attitude? Was there anything wrong with yours?
I don't remember ever getting a speeding ticket or a driving ticket ever in my life, and I drove for about 50-odd years. But there have been instances where police have approached me to issue an arrest or to point out some violation that I may have made, and I didn't like that at all. I felt, certain amount of arrogance. Who are you to approach me and tell me about the law and about breaking the law? And of course I was wrong. I think, as Paul points out, the civil government is established for the good order of society, and every child of God needs to respect that authority, because that authority, the rules and regulations of that authority are meant for the good order and peace of society. Absolutely. Which is a good thing, peace and order. We are blessed that although crime is, murder for instance, is out of hand, drug trafficking seems to be out of hand in our country, still there's a measure of peace and tranquility which makes civilized living in our country. And I think that we owe respect to the people who bring this about. And the people who most bring it about are the police, institutions like the police, the BDF, the Coast Guard, and other civil institutions.
Well, I can't remember getting a speeding ticket here in Belize, but I did get one in the United States. I remember many years ago, I had bought a car in Houston, and I had taken a friend of mine with me, and the idea was to drive it back to Belize. And we were driving, we had left Houston and we were driving, I can't remember what city we were going to, but we were going towards the Mexican border. And I didn't realize that I was driving so fast, but I saw in the mirror the blue and red lights flashing behind me, and I heard a siren, so I had to stop. And the policeman stopped me, and he was very nice about it. He didn't give me a ticket. He says, "What's the hurry, buddy?" And I tell him, "Oh, sorry, I'm sorry, officer, but I was anxious to get home." And I explained to him that I was on my way to Belize. And he just warned me, and he says, "Well, take it easy," and he let me go. But I think that, we all have a duty to respect authority, because all these laws are made for the good order, as you said, and for the good of society. So, we should obey the laws of the country, of the authorities. Yeah.
I don't remember getting a speeding ticket, although I think I've gotten once or twice a parking ticket, which made me really upset, because that's $50 right there. And yes, my attitude was wrong to get upset. I mean, it was my fault. I mean, can you imagine if everybody feels like they could park wherever they want? I mean, then there will be no order in society. There will be no order in the streets. So, of course, I was wrong. And, I still, of course, I had to pay that ticket. And I guess the same with Will, no? I mean, he wanted to breathe really hard on the officer. He was spiteful, or just because he got caught. And I guess a lot of us are like that. When we get caught, we tend to inflate ourselves. Like what you said earlier, Paul, who are you to,
As a child growing up, what authority figures do you most respect? And which ones did you find the hardest to respect?
As a boy, it was easy for me to respect police officers. But I don't mean what I'm going to say as an offense to the present police department. But I have the distinct impression that when I was a boy, police officers were respected, and most of all, they were respectable. I remember one in particular. This man was an unusual man in a way, a very extraordinary person. He was riding a bicycle at the age of, I think, 103, 104 on Albert Street in the thick of traffic. So he was a very unusual man. And well, I knew him. And I would see him on the streets now and again. He'd be doing duty But when you looked at him, man, there he was standing tall and straight, the very figure of authority and respectability. I mean, as a boy and a young man, I couldn't even think of opposing him when he was correcting me about the law or anything of that sort. And I think, generally speaking, our policemen were like him. They were always respectably dressed. They were never sloven. I mean, it would be, in his days, seeing a police officer, even off duty, carrying a bottle of beer or a can of beer on the street, drinking while he had on his uniform. That was absolutely forbidden. I mean, that was not tolerated at all, at all, at all. And these guys were soldiers too. I remember at the 10th celebrations, the British soldiers would be light off for the parade. And those guys, because they would actually faint on the spot. This happened several times, but they would not budge. They were the image of self-discipline and self-control. And, you know, without casting too many stones, I think that is something that is lacking in our society now. It seems that people don't care much for external appearances.
But you're sure you're thinking about when you were a child growing up? Because I remember when I was a child growing up, I can't remember thinking of policemen as my authority over me. As a child growing up, the people I respected and had authority over me first were my parents, and then my teachers, rather than policemen. I guess that policemen came, you know, when I started to relate to the outside world, the external world, but at home growing up.
I was a street boy.
My parents and my teachers.
Your father maintained you. I had to sell panades on the street, so, you know, I became very, very acquainted with the police and you know, encountered them every day because I had to walk the streets holding my pan of panades to sell panades. So I was more street smart than you were.
Yeah,
maybe.
Jason, no comment?
Well, I think the same for me, my parents and my teachers. But, well, which ones did you find the hardest to respect? I remember maybe my teachers, you know, I guess that was the time of rebellion. I remember one time I was caught cheating during an exam, and I was asked to turn over my paper, which I refused to do. And she insisted, and she insisted, and she insisted, and you know, I felt like she's starting to embarrass me. So I got up, I took my papers, I tore it, and I threw it at her, and then I left the classroom.
You're mad.
Can you imagine that? That was just one of many occasions, run-ins with my teacher. So I guess, you know, if you start hanging out with the wrong crowd, you know, you start to get that sort of attitude,
indisciplined.
Right.
Well, I think it's time to take a break, so we'll take a break now, and we ask you to stay tuned. We'll be back shortly. Welcome back to the Catholic Man's Journey. We're discussing Christians and civil authority. Why do you think St. Paul told the Roman Church not to resist civil authority?
Well, remember the days of St. Paul, the beginning of Christianity. It was different from now. Now we take certain things for granted. We take the faith and respect for the faith, tolerance of the faith, and acceptance of the faith for granted. But in the days of Paul, everybody, almost everybody, and his brother and sister were pagans. So they were used to the pagan authorities who established their gods and goddesses. Paul was, first of all, a Jew. And the Jewish religion from very early gave the people an understanding that of the true nature of man. You are body and soul, and Deuteronomy makes this plain. Look, there are rules that apply to your body and rules that apply to your spirit, to your soul. And God said, today I'm giving you these rules that you must follow if you want to be part of my people, if you want to be my children. And Paul was used to that. Our Lord Jesus Christ made this duality of human beings and living life as a human being even clearer. He says, when he was asked, should you pay taxes to Caesar? Yes, we are bound to pay taxes to Caesar because we live in society and we have to contribute to the good and to the good order and the rule of law in our society. But you're also children of God. We are children of the Heavenly Father. And there are certain rules that our Father, commandments that our Father has set down for us, which we must obey. And Jesus, by his own life, made it clear what was the superior set of rules that he had to obey and that we have to obey. And he proved this by going to the cross rather than giving in to the thinking of the Sadducees and the Pharisees. Peter made this very clear. I mean, Peter was a good citizen and encouraged Christians to be good citizens, to show the Roman authorities, the emperor, that they respected the civil authority. But when he was put in jail along with John, and then they were released, and when the Sadducees and the Pharisees, before they released them, he and John, they warned them and said, look, we are releasing you, but don't go out there and keep on talking about Jesus of Nazareth and how we crucified him and how he rose from the dead. And Peter looked them straight in the eye and said, you answer me this, whom should we obey, God or you? And obviously Peter knew that they would answer God. And this is the reality of the life of every human being, and especially of Christians. We live in two worlds, two kingdoms.
What I think is that Paul obviously told the church not to resist the civil authority because he knows that all authority comes from God. All authority comes from God. And therefore, the authority from the civil leaders, really comes from God, in order that, as you said again, that we should have proper order in our society. And the civil authority laws should, generally speaking, follow the laws given by God. Mm-hmm. But of course, when the laws clash, when God says one thing and civil authorities say something else, well then the Christian would perhaps not be obliged to follow the civil authorities because you have to follow God's law first. But generally speaking, the authority comes from God through the civil authorities, and it is in line with God's authority, so we're bound to obey it and respect it. Yeah.
We in Belize are blessed because our Constitution, the preamble, makes this very clear, that order and peace in society cannot exist at all if you don't follow moral and spiritual values. That is very important, and recently we have had a test on this, where an agenda where the civil authority tried to impose upon us an agenda imported from abroad. And I think the church the Catholic Church and the evangelicals made it clear, look, we're not going to obey that law. We resist that value. We will go with the values of Jesus Christ and of the Judeo-Christian tradition. Yeah, so you explained it extremely clearly, Mel.
Yeah. Let's go on to the next question, shall we? The Catechism states that citizens should voice just criticisms of governments and laws when they seem harmful to human dignity and the good of the community. Share about a time when you voiced criticism of a civil law. What is done constructively? Maybe you can tell us about this that you're talking about. Yes, that's what it is.
Yeah, one of the things that we need to do, though, as Catholic men, is to express our opposition as kindly and charitably as possible. When we fought the LGBT agenda during the past 5-6 years, the church, I was part of that crusade that the church, through the Bishops' Commission, embarked upon. But I noticed that certain people became very, they got to dislike me greatly. And I should have reflected then, look, maybe you're coming off as too self-righteous. Maybe you need to put some charity and kindness into what you need to say. But I think it's sometimes we have tremendous examples of people who have opposed, saints, martyrs and saints who have opposed the civil authority. The one that stands out in my mind the most is Thomas More. And Thomas was he was a lawyer. He was a gifted lawyer and a cultured gentleman. He became the chancellor of the realm. But when the king divorced his wife, when Henry VIII divorced his wife, he refused to discuss the matter with anybody. He just didn't support it. But he kept quiet. And, he kept quiet for his own self-preservation too. He thought that if I keep quiet and don't tell anybody why I oppose the act of supremacy that the king wanted every citizen to take, then they'll leave me alone. Well, it didn't turn out that way for him, because the king then asked Parliament to require that the oath be accepted, and every citizen had to swear. Every citizen who was asked to swear to the act of supremacy would have to swear it on the pain of treason. And he didn't and wouldn't explain to anybody, even to his wife and his daughter Margaret, whom he loved very dearly. And when the wife insisted, look, you ought to tell us, he said, no, I can't, because if they arrest me and you are taken to court and the Chief Justice asks you to swear on the Bible whether I have said anything to you explaining my opposition, you would, on the pain of committing perjury, you would have to say what I told you. So I won't explain to you, and I won't explain to anybody. He just kept silent. So we have had great men who have been very respectful of civil authority, as I hope that I can become like, but still stand your ground. I'm not going to yield on this point because it is against the law of God, So these things are easier said than done, though, but when you're put in jail, like Thomas More was, it's then, or Paul.
And thankfully, I don't think that our governments, since our independence, have passed any laws that seem to contradict the laws of God, do you think?
No, we import them, though. We import these issues, these agendas, We're induced by, funds and monies and loans and
so but we have not passed any laws that contradict God's laws. Thank God for that. Mm-hmm. Let's go on to the next question. How do you view the authority given to you in your job or in your family? Do you see it as handed down from God?
Of course, for me, as a family man and as a business person, whatever I have comes from God, and but we should be very careful in exercising that authority. Of course, it shouldn't be abused. At the same time, it should, you're expecting some level of obedience from your family or from your workers, no. But like I said, as long as you don't abuse it.
I think one area that we Catholic men need to improve on a lot. I think our dealing with our family, our relationship in the family circle. I think it's clear. The Bible makes it clear that the man is the head of the family. He is described as king and priest of his family. And I think that in our society, Belizean society, we men have abdicated our kingship and our priesthood in the family. We leave that to our wife. At least I think I'm guilty of that omission. And if it's a sin, guilty of that sin. That the husband, the father of the family, is the one who should set the basic family rules, like reading the Bible, maybe every day, going to Mass on Sundays as a family. These things, these things are, our society is not, our Belizean society is not the way it should be or could be, because there is not enough morality and religion being taught in the home by the father and the mother, especially not by the father. I have operated for a good part of most of my life with the presumption that children and people for whom I'm responsible would take example. Example is great, but I think that a man has to speak out the rules to his children. And I'm sorry that I didn't. And now I have a grandchild living in, a daughter and a grandchild living in my home with me. And we try to go together as family every Sunday to Mass together. Now and again we have to separate because my wife has certain duties that she has to perform at another Mass, but we like to go to the early 6:30 Mass at St. Ignatius. But in other things, I've been lacking. I read, I know the Bible pretty well, but I wish I had gotten my family to read the Bible as my wife and I do. She knows the Bible pretty well because she's the leader of a prayer group at St. Ignatius, has been for years. But we should have translated that into the home for our children.
Well, actually, how I view this is that God has given us this authority in our family. So we, as the head of our families, we're given this authority, and therefore we must exercise authority over the family in a loving way. And I suppose similarly in our jobs, I guess not every man has a role of authority in the workplace, because some of them, they're just ordinary workers who take orders from somebody and have nobody under their own authority. But those of us who have a certain authority over others in the workplace, well, then we must exercise it properly in accordance again with, the rules that God has set out. And again, bearing in mind that that authority comes ultimately from God. Yeah.
Jason,
anyway, I think that we have to take a break now. So we'll take a break now, and we'll be back shortly. Please stay tuned. Welcome back to the Catholic Man's Journey. We're discussing Christians and civil authority. Describe a time when you were in conflict with authority. Was the authority exercised legitimately?
I think it's relevant that we read Catechism 1903.
Okay, would you like to read it?
Yeah, I have it here.
Okay.
It says, Catechism 1903 says, authority is exercised legitimately only when it seeks the common good of the group concerned, and if it employs morally licit means to attain it. If rulers were to enact unjust laws or to take measures contrary to the moral order, such arrangements would not be binding in conscience. In such a case, authority breaks down completely and results in shameful abuse.
Well, thankfully, I can't think of a case where our governments here in Belize have passed such a law, have they? I mean, I can't remember they're passing any law that would make me say, well, no way, I'm not going to follow that law because of my religious beliefs.
Mel, you're right, basically, but we have come very close to the point where civil authority seem to want to impose an agenda that is immoral. And actually, what could have been done, which wasn't done, was when a case on homosexuality was presented to the Supreme Court, the first judge who was assigned the case recused herself. I haven't talked to her about it, why she recused herself, but I suspect if you are very conversant with the Constitution of Belize, and especially the preamble, you will say, but look, this, first of all, the preamble says under Article C clearly that the will of the people is the supreme authority in a democracy, which Belize is. E goes further to describe that the laws, the rules that are passed by our civil authority have to be consonant with moral and spiritual values. So I think even whoever took that case and have expressed this elsewhere publicly should have recused himself. Look, the Supreme Court of Belize does not have the authority to lay aside these two these two constitutional principles. That can be laid aside only by the will of the people of Belize. In other words, you have to have a referendum to decide a matter of that. And in other places, like California, a person who came here as a U.S. official, he was judge in California, and in his court, a referendum was placed twice in the state of California, and both times the people voted against the agenda, the LGBT agenda, and he in court delegitimized the referendum, which was seriously flawed. He was wrong. And I spoke of his impeachment. He should have been impeached. He wasn't. But maybe he still one of these days will be impeached, because the voice of the people in any democracy. And you see, even although we may be as sympathetic as possible to the LGBT agenda, we have to point out that it's not a right. It's an I want, but wants are not rights. A right is what your conscience tells you you're entitled to because you are made in the image and likeness of God. It's a moral position.
Describe how you would react if you suddenly learned that you were going to be imprisoned because of your religious beliefs. How do you think your family would feel?
Talk is cheap. Talk is cheap.
Exactly. This is a very difficult question. It talks about obedience, but obedience to whom? Obedience to God or obedience to moral authority? The authority.
But the civil authority is
obedience,
putting you in jail.
Obedience is, of course, it's very important. You see, for example, Lucifer, he wasn't obedient to God. He was the brightest of angels. That's why he was cast down. And in St. Faustina's diary, Jesus told her that, her obedience to her confessor will gain a lot more than any amount of prayer or any amount of works of mercy. So, Jesus himself emphasized that obedience. But, here in this
he was
question,
obedient unto death on a cross.
Exactly.
He certainly
But in this
that
question,
point.
Obedience, who are we going to obey? Of course, it's easier to say, we're going to obey God, but in this situation, I don't ever want to cross that bridge. I hope it doesn't get to that. I pray that we'll have the courage and the strength, to obey God rather than the human authority.
Well, certain people like Thomas More, I guess this is why we call him Saint Thomas More, as he was going to the block where they were going to cut off his head, he was praying for the king and made a declaration. He says, I am going to my death, and I pray that my death be a source of grace for the king. Actually, that...
So he still prayed for the king.
Those things are easily said, but that takes a special grace from God for you to, you become most like Christ when you
Actually, basically, it means we would have to be martyrs.
Yeah.
We have to become martyrs.
Yeah.
In other words, we have to become martyrs for our faith. A lot of people have not only gone to jail, but as you say, they have been killed. They've been killed because of their faith, and they didn't give up their faith.
Well, that's going on right now, people in the Middle East, Syria, Christians have refused, they have fled, but when they were caught, refused to give up their faith.
And throughout the history,
there's
there's a lot of saints
we are living in, but
saints. If you read the lives of our saints, a lot of them, they were drawn, they were beheaded, they were grilled. Saint Lawrence was grilled. Exactly, boiled.
They were willing to suffer for their faith.
Yeah.
In other words, their faith is number one.
But in our day, we have, like Sister Father Maximilian Kolbe, who died in one of the concentration camps in Auschwitz. And he was in there for his faith, but he actually gave up his life in exchange for a Jew who had a family and young children. Then we have Edith Stein, who is known as Sister Teresa Benedicta, who was, she could have lived her life quietly and peacefully, but she left her Jewish faith, became a Catholic, and became a nun, an Ursuline nun.
And closer to home in Mexico, there was this Which
yeah.
priest was it? Who?
Miguel Pro.
Miguel Pro.
Miguel
He
Pro.
died saying "Viva Cristo Rey," and they
so-
shot him.
yeah. So we have had countless. I mean, God knows how many martyrs just during our
in Salvador
decade.
too, no?
Salvador, Oscar
Bishop
Romero. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oscar Romero. Bishop Gerardi.
Well, actually, he was killed, but he didn't really give his life. Knowingly for
No, he
his
didn't want
faith.
to be, yeah.
In other words, they just murdered him while he was saying mass.
Mass, yeah.
So I mean, it's a bit different. In other words, these other fellows, they knew that they could have avoided death by just giving up their faith, and they didn't. While Romero, he didn't actually voluntarily give up his life. They just shot him while he was saying mass.
Because he spoke against.
He spoke the truth.
He spoke
the
in
truth,
that way it is,
yeah.
because in other words, he spoke against them. So perhaps in that way, you can say he was a brave man, and obviously that's why he's honored today.
But we have all different kinds of saints with all, because Paul, now his life was a great adventure, because he would disguise himself to go to a place to say mass, and he would have to devise ways to get out of that place to another place, and he'd go to another place, and he'd say mass, It's, we have had some really very, very powerful, very imaginative, very creative people who have been Catholics and who have died for their faith. Pope John Paul II would have been a martyr if he had. Well, they tried to kill him. They tried when he was shot.
They tried to murder him. Yeah.
The KGB wanted to kill him and just missed by a. Yeah.
The Virgin protected him.
Yeah. So we are sons of a great tribe of.
And how do you think your family would feel? We didn't answer that.
I don't know. I think my wife and all my children, they would try to persuade me. Look, man, think one and say the words with your mouth, but think differently in your heart. But Thomas More is one who told his daughter, "Look, that doesn't work. Huh? What you think in your heart is what is most important." So, but I'm sure they would try to. And I mean, I can't blame them. I mean, maybe that's what a family member should do. But
no, I think that the family, if it could be avoided without you're giving up your faith, without renouncing your faith, fine. But I don't think that they would encourage me to give up my faith.
Yeah, I think so.
They would say, sorry, going to the block, but we have to stick with it. Anyway, and I think that on that note, we come to the end of our program today, and we ask you to watch us again, this program. We'll be back next week at the same time with another program of the Catholic Man's Journey.